Welcome, everybody, to the March National Equine Conference call. And just so everyone's aware, we are recording this call. And I know it's taken us a little time, but we have got it now sorted that by the end of next week, all the recordings for the January call and for the February call will be posted. And they're going to be posted to the Equine Disease Communication Center YouTube page as well as their web page. I will send out the links next week once that is all posted. So you have those two calls, and then we will be subsequently putting this call up, the recording of this call. So I appreciate everybody's patience and letting us get this all sorted out. And that is how we'll proceed in the future, is that we will record all calls and they will be posted from here on in. And I appreciate everybody changing their schedule for this week, as next week is the AQHA convention, and we didn't want to conflict with that as far as the schedule. Our next call will be April 11th, same second Thursday, going back to our second Thursday schedule on April 11th. And as always, I greatly appreciate the suggestion of any topics or speakers. And that's how we actually got these speakers for today. Is I appreciate those of you that submitted questions or topic ideas. So without further ado, we will turn it over to Dr. Emma Adams, who is an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky's Gluck Equine Research Center. Dr. Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much indeed. It's a pleasure to be able to share some of the work that we're doing, and I know lots of people are interested in this. So just a little update on the equine rotavirus B vaccine situation that we're currently working on. Obviously, I'm sort of the front man for Dr. Feng Li and Dr. Dan Wang, who are our fabulous virologists working on this. So 1 second, there we go. So rotavirus doesn't really need much introduction, but clearly we've had a big issue with this over the past few years. It's spreading now over to lots of different states, and now we know that it's in a large quarter horse group in another state. So with that said, I do want to just put this out there for people because we have had quite a lot of interest with regard to rotavirus, and initially it being misconstrued as Clostridium perfringens. And I want to give a really big shout out to the work done by Josie Traub and her team. In this case, Kirsten Tillotson was the first author on this very extensive study that I think sometimes we lose sight of these older studies. But this is a study where we know from culture that these completely normal foals, 90% of which were culture positive at day 3 of age. These were all healthy foals. And it was a huge study. I've got the citation here done by Dr. Traub-Dargotz and her team there, with 124 foals followed. So when we come up with foals that have diarrhea, and that people are thinking that it's a Clostridium perfringens type A, I do want us to make sure we question that, because sometimes it is not the actual, it could be just an overgrowth organism and there because it's there. So that's something that I wanted to just share with people. So obviously this was the picture that we were seeing in 2021, a classic rotavirus situation that we detected using a metagenomics approach. Identified a brand new rotavirus of group B. No one has ever grown group B rotavirus, and so that is a bit of a problem. We've had the luxury of a vaccine for rotavirus A since the early 90s, and I'm old enough to remember what it was like before we had rotavirus A vaccine, and this is exactly what we saw. We saw these kind of neonatal problems in foals. The earlier the foal, the younger the foal, the more significant the disease, typically speaking, and it waxed and waned back in those days, and that's kind of what we're seeing now pre-Rota B vaccine. So obviously we need to get going with Rota B. I put this in here as a reminder to share with people about Clostridium type A. Make sure that it's a different presentation. It's not every single foal. It's not running through them. These are circulatory shock. These have, they're not just a few bags of fluids and they pop right back up like a wilted plant. Rotavirus B, just like A, hugely infectious. Very small numbers of virion particles can infect foals. And so we have tried innumerous measures in terms of biosecurity. And really the only thing that has helped farms break the cycle is to use strict biosecurity and a hands-off approach. And that hands-off approach is pretty much don't touch them for about 7 days. Obviously, apart from some intervention if they need help at foaling, and some intervention when they're getting their day one foal check. But essentially, it's these kind of management techniques that have been able to limit the problem and stop the cycle on many farms. Not easy to do, which is why we've still got farms struggling with this. So obviously, massive industry need for a vaccine, but of course, we only see this in breeding areas. It's not limited to Central Kentucky. I can assure you, we've seen it in California, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, Louisiana, and Texas. As so far, we haven't detected it in other countries. Now, one of the things that's really important to remember is that rotavirus A, they only sell 56,000 doses of that vaccine per year made by Zoetis. It's a conditional license. They have to reapply every single year. The nice thing about rotavirus A is that it was able to be cultured successfully in cell cultures to be able to produce the vaccine we currently have. That's not the case in Rota B. Nobody's grown a group B rotavirus in culture. We've made some glimmers and some inroads into that, but we're not there yet. But also, really importantly, is that this is just like rotavirus A vaccine. It's a really niche vaccine. So we don't have the large pharmaceutical companies jumping in there wanting to produce vaccines that aren't going to be huge sellers. And so this is very much heal thyself. And as you can see, we've been fortunate to have obtained support for this project, which is being conducted on a shoestring, but we've been able to garner support from the industry because nobody else was going to be running over the horizon like a cavalry. So the primary challenges with regard to rotavirus B research and vaccine development was not being able to grow it in culture, in a cell line. We've tried loads and loads of cell lines, but also that for the past 3 decades, there's been really minimal equine rotavirus research on a benchtop level. So we didn't have the molecular level research tools to use, for example, assays and all the various things that would go with. So we needed to develop many of those assays, and that's exactly what Dr. Lee and Dr. Wang have done in their lab. They have been able to develop some detection assays. We don't, at this point in time, we're working on whether they are functional protective assays. Let's see. My computer. So the good news is that with all of this heroic amount of work being done in really amazing Mach speed, 6 vaccine candidates were developed. 2 of those vaccine candidates are lipid nanoparticle mRNA vaccines. Those haven't been used in horses before, so we had to start off with mouse trials. And then virus-like particles, 4 different vaccine candidates for virus-like particles. And that particular trial started with a safety and efficacy trial. Now, efficacy is not quite the word, but at least immunogenicity. So we have at least been able to look at these VLPs in our horse herd, where we've had 40 horses under trial. They're a mixed group of horses, and they are not pregnant, so just mares and geldings of various ages. But so far, the horse study has been completed and the samples are currently being analyzed. The mouse vaccine trial was quite encouraging, in fact, very encouraging. That was completed and those vaccines are transitioning now into horse trials. So we were very happy with what we saw on the safety component of this trial. The vaccines used in these horses appeared to be safe. Only one horse had actually a 1-degree increase in temperature during that period of time above its sort of normal morning and evening temperatures. The vaccines didn't seem to create much of a reaction. In fact, just a few horses showed some mild reactions at the injection site, and they were sort of gelatinous. They weren't hard, painful, swollen to the extent that the horse didn't want to use its neck or stopped eating. So we saw something, but it was very easy to deal with, and they all were gone by 48 hours, most 24 hours. Last year, we were very fortunate to work with a farm that was heroically able to give us frequent samples on foals that were infected and not infected with rota B, so that we had natural convalescent titers going from the time of infection all the way through Christmas. So we were able to use that huge data bank to take a look and see what the vaccines were eliciting in terms of an antibody. And of course, remember that this vaccine that we're trying to generate is designed to be used in pregnant mares in exactly the same way as the rotavirus A vaccine is currently used to elicit colostral immunity for passive transfer protection. So that's been absolutely very successful in rotavirus A. So that is the goal with this set of vaccines. So we've been very happy that the antibody titers that have been measured have been over and above those that were seen in the convalescent foal sera. Whether we can compare antibodies raised in vaccinated adults with naturally occurring convalescent sera is a whole different ball of wax, but it's all we have to go on at the moment. Going forward, obviously, we're now looking at how we use these vaccines in an experimental model with our research herd. We do have a large number of pregnant mares. We typically foal in the summer, and those pregnant mares are imminently scheduled to be vaccinated with, at this point, the question is whether it's one or two of our most promising vaccines, so that's to be determined. But at least we have that vaccine project going forward this summer with Dr. Lee. And obviously, if that goes well, then clearly the next step would be the design and construction and recruitment for a clinical trial. In terms of whether that turns out to be a challenge model or not, that is still to be determined, because obviously not growing rota B in the lab means we have to source it from natural sources. But at the moment, sadly, that is not a problem. I'm getting still a lot of samples. Now, the development of a functional virus neutralizing assay is obviously slightly challenging given the inability to grow this virus, but we do have some alternative strategies that are currently being employed. So we're happy with that. The other thing that we've been working on is we've been working with a large a hyperimmune plasma company to develop a hyperimmune plasma that could be used in much the same way that hyperimmune plasma or synthetic antibodies are used in rotavirus A that affects human children and babies, and that is to be used orally. And interestingly, when those products are used in sick babies and children that already have the disease, and obviously in humans, they're susceptible up till about 5 years old. So they actually have a fully capable acidic protein digesting stomach, so different to our neonatal foals that this would potentially be targeted for. They actually see about a 50% reduction in the morbidity associated with human rotavirus A infections, and a 50% reduction in hospital stay length, and some reduction in fecal shedding after the cessation of diarrhea symptoms. So that's a promising avenue that we hope to be able to pull off this year. They're currently hyperimmunizing those horses. And so we hope to have at least a hyperimmune plasma that might be able to be used for intravenous or oral use. Along the lines, we're still working on rotavirus A in the Li Wang lab. There's still a lot of interest in that. Just to catch you up that we haven't forgotten about it completely, because obviously we still see this as a problem in foals that are sort of 90 to 120 days, sometimes 60, but certainly in that slightly older age group where you're just ready to put them out for the rest of the year. And unfortunately, that you'll get that diarrhea going through the herd. And it can be a real problem. We certainly do see quite significant morbidity associated with some cases. So the G3 vaccine is G3 is the vaccine strain of the equine rotavirus A currently used. We see a bit more G14 genotype in that age of animal. I believe the reason related to that is that G3 produces antibodies, obviously against G3, but they are somewhat active against the G14 genotype. So that sort of makes sense with the clinical picture that we see. So we're currently investigating a point where we might be able to intervene with a vaccine during foalhood. Obviously, it's not a slam dunk because of potential interference of maternal antibodies, and people have certainly used the equine rotavirus A vaccine in foals with sort of varying degrees of success. So it's an extra label use, and it seems to be used in a wide variety of ways, and we're trying to understand and determine if there's a better way to use it. And so that's about it. I think I might have rushed through, but I didn't want to take too much time. I want to recognize everybody to realize that this is an absolute team effort, not just from boots on the ground, people on the farms, the veterinarians, but also the researchers here and in other places. And it takes a lot more than a village, and it particularly with the problems with funding, because when something emerges, you can't tell people what the impact is. And so obtaining grant funding dollars has been a real challenge. Now it's getting a little more traction, but we are fortunate to have received funding from the KTA and KTOB as the main drivers of this, with contributions from several of the practices around here. And then, of course, we were able to get recently a Grace and Jockey Club Research Foundation gift, and we've had quite a large amount of support for this from our internal funding from the university and the people listed on this picture here. Zoetis have been very kind that they still have an interest in helping us look into what rotavirus A is doing. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody and hope that wasn't too much of a whistle stop.
Thanks, Dr. Adam. If you have some questions, you're welcome to ask them now or put them in the chat. We have time for 1 or 2 questions at this time. If we do not get to your question and we put it in the chat, I'll be sure we get an answer to you.
Stunned silence, that always is successful. All right, thank you.
Well, Dr. Adam, I'm not going to let you go that easy. I do have a question for you. On the 4 vaccines, did they show equivalent, or when you were saying they had an immune response, were they equivalent immune responses, or were they were you able to differentiate 2 out that are better than the other 2, I guess?
At this point in time, it looks like there could be a couple of front runners, but I haven't seen all of the data, so that's yet to be determined. And I see Josie's got, where did I see Josie had a question?
I got it. It's, will storage and use of an mRNA be an issue in equine practice setting?
Great question, and I'm certainly not the person that can answer that, I'm afraid. I think given that we can handle vaccines reasonably successfully as a group and a team, and we do know how important that is, obviously, from that big outbreak of herpes in Germany that Lutz had to deal with and figured out it could have been a chain of care for the vaccine. I think that's something we're going to need to take a look at. So good question, Josie. Thank you. And I'm sorry I haven't got the right answer.
All right, Dr. Adam, I appreciate you getting on the call and giving us this update.
Thank you very much.
So at this time, I'm going to transition to our USDA disease updates by Dr. Angela Pelzel-McCluskey with USDA. There you go, Angela. It's all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. I have several quick updates to share for you. None of them are well organized into a presentation as Dr. Adam had for us, so I apologize for that. I'm going to bounce around just a little bit, but I do want to at least get you topics or updates on 4 different equine disease regulatory topics that are usually of interest to this group. So beginning first with maybe our equine infectious anemia and our equine pyroplasmosis updates. We're formulating our 2023 reports right now. So this is just preliminary data that I'm going to share with you orally. But I do at least have enough information to give you the gist of what happened last year. So for calendar year 2023, for equine infectious anemia, it looks like we've done at least 1.3 million tests in the United States last year. It's looking like 1,355,000 or so. So when we finalize our report, we'll get you a clear number on that, but obviously quite a lot of testing as we always do each year. And out of those number of tests, we did find 61 EIA confirmed positive horses that were found last year in 14 different states. The breakdown of risk factors on those, at least 40 of the 61 positives were current or former quarter horse racehorses, most of them with ties to some bush track racing in their career. So that's a common high risk group for us where iatrogenic transmission is the cause of spread in those horses. So we've talked about that on this call a lot. 4 of the 61 positives were suspected or confirmed illegal movement from Mexico. So they came direct as infected from Mexico. 8 horses were clearly from untested or undertested populations where there may have been natural fly-bite transmission involved in those cases. And we still have 9 of the 61 cases. The disease source has not yet been confirmed. They're still under investigation or the source is undetermined. So we're going to continue to work to get those into their high risk category if possible, but those are still pending a bit. Of the 61 EIA positives, we had at least 2 horses that were dual infected with both EIA and pyroplasmosis. So that's another hallmark of our iatrogenic transmission situation, or sometimes smuggled horses from Mexico will also be carrying both diseases. So moving over to our pyroplasmosis update for calendar year 2023, I don't have the total numbers of tests run in the US yet, but I expect them to be between about 20 and 25,000 tests run for pyroplasmosis last year. And that's going to be in a variety of different horse types. It's going to be in a lot of high-risk horses like quarter horse racehorses being tested to enter a racetrack where they have an EP test requirement. But we also have many other horses tested, export purposes, change of ownership, pre-purchase, movement from specific states to other states. So I expect about 20,000 to 25,000 horses were tested last year, but when our report comes out, we'll have that nailed down for you. Out of those tested, we found 14 pyropositive horses last year in 6 different states. 13 of those cases were Theileria equi, and we did have 1 Babesia cabali case last year. 11 of the 14 cases were quarter horse racehorses. And again, most of these did have clear ties at some point in their career to bush track racing, or some of them were found bush track racing at the time that they were positive. 2 of the 14 were suspected or confirmed illegal movements directly from Mexico, where the disease is endemic. And 1 case is still under investigation, and the source for that has not yet been determined. I'm going to move on to a different disease topic. I'm going to try to share my screen here for this one. Let's start here. So I wanted to bring up the equine arbovirus dashboard. We launched this last year on the USDA public website, so it's accessible actually to all of you. And I'll put in the chat a link to this dashboard after I'm done here, so that you guys, I don't want you to crash it while I'm on it. I don't know how sturdy it is at this point, but this is on our public USDA website. And it's really a neat tool. You can actually look back several years of data to our West Nile virus and our Eastern equine encephalitis cases in horses. This is the 2023 report. Oh, it kicked me off, so let me try again. Katie, can you still see that? Did it come back up for you guys?
Yep,
Okay, perfect.
we can see
So
it.
perfect. The dashboard is broken down in a couple of different ways. It'll show you the total case counts. And again, this is last calendar year. And we're only finding West Nile and Triple E at this point. I think most of you know that Western equine encephalitis seems to have left us. That might not be a permanent condition, as right now they're getting Western equine encephalitis outbreaks in several countries in South America, and it had been gone from them for several decades. So we could always get it surprised back. We are still looking for it, but we haven't found any. One of the cool things about this dashboard is that it gives you an interactive map, and you can also scale down to your particular state or area, and you can hover over certain dots and get information about the county level data involved there. And then you have tabular data information that you can also search and look for. And back at the top, hopefully I'm not scrolling too fast, you can choose the state, you can choose the year, and it's a bit interactive so that you can go back and look at previous cases. So again, I'll put the link to this in the chat here when I'm done, but a very neat upgrade for us to allow you guys the opportunity to go get equine specific information on both diseases that have met confirmed case definition and use that data as you see fit. So I'm going to stop sharing that one and maybe pick a different screen here. So one more update I want to give you guys that was pertinent this year. Let me see if that comes up. Katie, can you see VSV map?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think most of you all followed along throughout last year's VSV outbreak on our situational reporting. We were doing weekly situation reports, but there's a few highlights to last year's outbreak that is now cleared and determined as over. The last positive case or quarantine premises that was affected was released in California on January 18th. And then we usually have a 30-day waiting period. We need to see no new cases for 30 days after the last quarantine release before we declare the outbreak over. And we have now passed that. We passed that on February 17th. And still no new cases. And so we've reverted back to, we're looking for the next index case for the nation that would indicate the start of a new outbreak year. This particular map was the cumulative map from last year's outbreak. We had a total of 319 infected premises throughout the country. Most of the activity, as you know, was in California. We did have one case on multiple cases on one premises in one county in Nevada, and cases in 2 different counties in Texas, both singleton premises. The Texas case in Maverick County to the south would have been a natural incursion. The northern case, the Shackelford County case, looks to have been likely an animal movement, not to or from the affected premises, but an animal movement infected to the area that then infected vectors and then transmitted locally. And the same situation happened in the Nevada case, where those horses that were infected didn't move, but they had, it looks like we brought infected horses to the area that infected the vectors and then infected the horses that we found positive ultimately. Fortunately, none of those cases led to other localized cases, and those ended there. The California situation, however, we had several new things happening last year, and we've mentioned it on this call before, but this was the first time we had a natural incursion of VSV virus into California with vectors moving upward from Mexico from the south. Normally, Southern California has a big heat dome and their extreme drought situation over Southern California that seems to have had a protective effect for decades. And as you guys know, last winter and spring, there was a great deal of water, both in rainfall and in snowfall, that hit California and did trickle down and impact Southern California. So we had a lot of vegetation, we had a lot of standing and moving water that normally isn't there, and that seems to have supported movement of the infected vectors northward from Mexico and created a natural incursion of VSV. Previous to last year's outbreak, we only had one incursion of VSV into California, and that was through it was an animal movement. We moved infected dairy cattle from Colorado to California and caused that incident in 1982-83. So it was a very interesting year for climate reasons as far as why California got hit. A couple other things that happened that I wanted to point out. In last year's outbreak, we also had a new infected species that we didn't know was a susceptible species. We had a herd of 26 rhinoceros in Southern California that became lesioned and were severely affected by VS virus. So it was pretty surprising. I guess we probably should have guessed it because rhinos are ancient lineage genetically related to horses, and horses, as we know, are quite susceptible to VSV. So maybe we could have guessed that, but it was still a shock. And it was very difficult for those animals. They had a lot of trouble with lesion healing, especially sloughing of their foot pads, and very extreme lamenesses that had to be managed. And so that was really tough. The final thing that happened that was quite a shock last year was the use of some of our weather patterns to actually change the course of an outbreak and disease occurrence, which did happen in Southern California. On August 20th, we had Hurricane Hillary take a direct hit on Southern California, which I'm told is something that really is rare and doesn't happen. Apparently, Southern California has been under some sort of hurricane warning only 3 times in the last 100 years. So having a hurricane hit Southern California is unusual. It's a rare event. It did hit on August 20th, and I want to show you what it did on our outbreak graph. This dead zone where we had no cases at all for a couple of weeks was a direct result, it appears, from Hurricane Hillary slamming into Southern California. August 20th is actually immediately after this last bar you see here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I hope you can. That was August 20th when Hurricane Hillary hit Southern California, and it actually completely shut down the outbreak in Southern California for the duration of the event. When we had new cases pop again, those occurred in the Central Valley region, and we did not have any more cases of VSV in Southern California the whole time. So the flooding activity and heavy winds and all of that seems to have done what I've described to you guys, I think, before as a giant toilet flush on Southern California, taking our vector eggs and larvae potentially out to the Pacific Ocean. And we didn't see any more cases in Southern California. So a positive effect of climate change, potentially a rare and unusual weather pattern that actually helped Southern California in response to this outbreak rather than hindered it, although it didn't really do anything at all for the continuation of the outbreak in the Central Valley, and all the rest of these cases slowly marched northward and ended somewhere around Sacramento County, that far north is what it did. So very interesting outbreak last year. We have our VSV Grand Challenge team that have climatologists, ecologists, and others that are working together to try to look at different parameters and data and study models related to VSV. Right now, they don't have a prediction for me yet. They're working now on a prediction for whether or not we will be hit in 2024. I will mention, though, most of you have seen in the news that currently we have a temporary lake that has formed in Death Valley. And so that probably bodes not well for whether or not we would support, have ecological support for infected vectors with VSV in California next year. I think that's still too much water, too much vegetation, and we're likely to be able to support an expansion year following last year's incursion year. So we'll be on the lookout for that. And certainly I'll provide updates and information to this group if and when that happens. But a very interesting set of events last year, especially related to VSV. So Katie, I'll leave it at that and just see if there are any questions. And then when I'm done, I'll put that equine arbovirus dashboard in the chat.
Thanks for leaving us with that note of maybe we're going to see more in the Death Valley area. I'm sure California
maybe
is
not in Death
excited.
Valley. Maybe not in Death Valley. I don't have any horses standing in Death Valley to show us an outbreak,
but in that geographic area.
I think it just tells you there's too much water there. Yeah.
Uh-huh. We do have one question in the chat, and then I've received one. The question in the chat is, who is supposed to submit the information to the dashboard on behalf of the state? And I believe that's regarding the arbovirus information.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So this is data that's being pulled out of CDC's ArboNet. So your state public health officials are the ones that are entering the data for confirmed positive equine cases of triple E or West Nile. They're putting it into ArboNet, and then this dashboard is pulling data specific to equids out of ArboNet that CDC has allowed us to use, and then it populates into the dashboard. I will tell you there's a pause period where CDC's ArboNet is not updating anything until usually early in the summer season. So maybe June, July would be the first that we would start to see 2024 cases being populated in there. They sort of have a downtime seasonally. We've tried really hard to ask them to be allowed to get that data a bit earlier in the season, just because we have seen cases of triple E specifically in February and March historically and this year. So that data is not going to populate until CDC turns on that data transmission to us later this summer. So I apologize that there's going to be a lag time. But the responsibility, again, is in the hands of our state public health officials in communication with our state animal health officials, confirming those equine cases and getting them in. So there is a bit of a lag time.
I will also note that for those states that are reporting to the EDCC, we are seeing them report those arbovirus cases, whether it's triple E or West Nile. So thank you to those states. Angela, and the other question I have for you is regarding the B. Kabali case, the one case, was that in a quarter horse?
It was in a quarter horse bush track horse. Yes.
Okay. All right, that's the only questions I have received, and I am seeing no more. So thank you, Angela, for your time.
Thank you, guys. I'll populate the chat here with that link.
Thank you. At this time, we'll transition to Dr. Jennifer Dernberger, who is the Director of Equine Safety and Welfare for HISA. And I'm going to turn it over to you and put myself on mute.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate being invited to speak to this group and go after my esteemed colleagues. For those of you who don't know, because I think we've got some folks not in the racing industry on this call for sure. So HISA is the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. We were recognized by an act of Congress in late 2020, the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Act. We are under the oversight of the Federal Trade Commission. And our mandate from Congress is to create a uniform set of safety and integrity rules. And that, my friends, is much easier said than done. And particularly in this area, we are learning that uniformity is something that our stakeholders in our racing industry really want and crave. And they don't understand the need to be able to have flexibility to respond to things locally in real time. So we are in the process, before I go into the rules, of reevaluating our industry-facing educational materials, because I think folks are confused. They're craving uniformity, and they think that that means that HISA controls this space. And this space, when it comes to vaccine requirements, health certificate requirements, infectious disease protocols, is the one area in safety where we actually do not preempt a local state rule or USDA rule. So that's created some confusion. We recognize that it is a work in progress. And so I'm actually looking for help and for feedback from those of you on this call. But let me go ahead and share what our current rules are. And I know Dr. Noah Cohen is on this call. He was part of the HISA's Standing Committee on Safety, and they spent, I don't know how many hours working on the initial set of safety rules. And those went into effect on July 1st of 2022. So when it comes to what's pertinent for this group and this call, we've got this racehorse monitoring rule, and we've got an infectious disease outbreak rule to talk about. So the racehorse monitoring rule appears in a section of our rules that has to do with racetrack accreditation. So this rule actually doesn't tell a trainer what they need to do. It tells a racetrack what they need to do. This is to encourage the racetracks to really take the in and out procedures very seriously. Diseases that affect the racetrack, of course, are diseases of economic importance to the state and to interstate commerce. And so what you'll see in 2143A is probably familiar to a lot of you. We got the AAEP core vaccines on there, right, as annual requirements. Then we've got this verification of influenza and rhino vaccines within the prior 180 days or fewer days if high-risk situations dictate. And I'm going to come back to that one. The Coggins within a calendar year or shorter period of time if high-risk situations dictate. And I actually skipped over the CVI, which is a 5-day health certificate or fewer if high-risk situations dictate. And so when it comes to the risk-based vaccines like the flu rhino and the health certificate requirements, I think that the racing population is a little bit different than the average adult equine. And so there's some specific concerns that come up when you're dealing with a population that's young, on the move a lot, and under stress and fairly immune naive. We've got 2 requirements on the racetrack for what they should be doing, monitoring horses coming and going. I'm going to skip over that here in the interest of time, and we're going to move to D. D, no one reads D. So our stakeholders who are craving uniformity read A, and they do not read D. And D, I think, is where we really need to focus our educational efforts. So horses that are going interstate, we don't preempt there, right? So if a state's requiring a 72-hour health certificate, the 72-hour health certificate controls. Strangles in Kentucky last spring, I know Churchill Downs went to a same-day health certificate. That controls. Obviously, anything that's happening in the destination state or a USDA requirement is something that we are not going to preempt. We are going to defer to them. And that's been problematic for our stakeholders who feel like they can't do that. And thank you, Angela, for the VSV story, because that came up in California, right? Can California really require a VSV certification on its health cert? It's not in the HISA rules. Yes, they can, as a matter of fact, and that's because of D, right? So we're looking to reevaluate how we communicate to stakeholders, because they kind of forgot what they used to do, right? I've been working in racing since the late 80s. And if you're writing a health certificate for a horse that's shipping from state A to state B, what do? You pick up the phone and you call state B and you find out what the import requirements are to come into that state. And everyone stopped doing that when the HISA rules took effect. And so that's been concerning to us. It's been problematic, and we are really working to change that so that people understand what's expected of them. Infectious disease management, similarly, right? We require that racetracks have protocols in place so that they're not kind of scrambling if there's a new situation. But as you see in C, all covered persons meaning under HISA's authority, have to adhere to the disease control measures implemented by a state racing commission or a state animal health official. So if we have a reportable disease and the State Department of Ag is in there, then that, whatever they say goes, right? And we will completely defer to them. We've had, since July 1st, 2022, we've had a number of racetracks that have had barns under quarantine for various reasons. Most of it, of course, is equine herpes. But we've had certainly a couple of strangles outbreaks in the Midwest, or in the Midwest and some Mid-Atlantic. And so we get the question a lot is what does, what is HISA going to do? What is HISA doing here? And HISA is deferring to the state and local animal health officials on those. So I'm happy to answer questions, but I'm also really interested in talking to this group because I don't always have the opportunity to speak to you. Pretty busy and deep in the HISA weeds, but if you have any ideas for how we can help get that message, we're in charge of safety and integrity on the racetrack, and I feel like state and local and USDA animal health officials are in charge of protecting the borders, right, against infectious disease coming in and out of the place that they have jurisdiction. So I am more than happy to consider any suggestions. I'm happy to answer questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to get these rules in front of you.
So folks that have questions, feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you, or you can put them in the chat. This topic was brought to my attention to request this specifically related to the health certificates and disease outbreaks and authorities. Jennifer, one of the questions that I did receive prior to this call was, does the track have the authority under HISA, or who has the authority to allow the states the records of horses in and out for traceability purposes?
I'm not sure I fully so can the
So
track
who should the state go to? Who should the state go to if there is a disease traceability question? So say there's an EIA horse
Mhm.
that raced there recently and we need all the records of who shipped in and shipped out. Is that still the track's responsibility, or do the state have to go through HISA?
No. So certainly the track, the State Racing Commission, to the point it's applicable. And if you have any records requests of us, we will give you whatever we have.
That was the specific question, was when it's an outbreak, does HISA get involved with the state, or do we just work through does the state just work through the track?
Yep. So nothing has changed there other than my tracks are really good. The regulatory veterinarians at the track level are really good about updating me and just letting me know what's going on, which, we appreciate, right? That heads up. But, we're not positioned, my colleague, Dr. Hassan, is on this call. We're the only two veterinarians that work for HISA. So we're not positioned to respond, to come on the ground and understand even the physical layout, right, of the different plants. And so and we don't know what else is going on in the state, right? I mean, we have authority on a covered racetrack and we have no idea the disease status within the rest of the state. So we enjoy being informed. That's not your responsibility. It's the responsibility of the regulatory vets that we work with on the ground, but we defer to you all. You are in charge, and to the extent that diseases are reportable, we expect, and in fact, our rule does require that all of the reporting channels are maintained.
Any questions? I'm not seeing any. And I'm not hearing any. Oh, let me see. Wait a minute.
Oh, there's a question.
Can a state animal health official have a HISA account?
Absolutely. So we have, so there's two things at play here. Anyone in the world actually can register with HISA through our portal. And what that does is it does two things. If you're a veterinarian and you're not working on the racetrack, it allows you still to enter medical records if you see a horse in a referral practice setting or an ambulatory setting. But it also gets you on our mailing list. And so you would get updates that we would send to registered persons. That's separate from the law. So the law talks about covered people and non-covered people. And the rule of thumb basically is you're a covered person if the State Racing Commission requires you to be licensed to function in whatever capacity you're functioning. So anyone can register. You don't have to be a covered person. If you go to hisaus.org, I can put that in the chat, but it's pretty simple. hisaus.org. At the very top, there'll be a login register button, and you can register as a non-covered veterinarian. That'll get you veterinary updates as they come.
Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you coming on and giving us this update and the actual rules. That's very helpful to folks on this call. And if there's any updates, we'll encourage folks to go to the hisaus.org to log in to get an account. Any other questions? Last call for questions. Okay, I appreciate your time, Jennifer. Thank you for coming on. And to all our speakers, I really appreciate you coming on, and to those that have suggested topics for this call. Just a couple housekeeping issues. Number one, I always welcome any topic or speaker suggestions that you may have. You can email those to kflynn@usef.org. or we can, just give me a call and I'm happy to take those suggestions. Also, I do maintain this email distribution list for this call, and anyone is welcome to this call, and you're welcome to email me again at kflin@usef.org, and we'll add you to this list for these upcoming calls, which are always focused on the second Thursday of the month, although this one did have to move. With that being said, our next call will be April 11th, which is the second Thursday at the same time and the same Zoom location. So thank you everyone for your time, and I wish everyone a great rest of your week and happy weekend. Thanks again.